that story, Suleiman. First of all, let me welcome Nigerians onto this program and to thank you for the opportunity to discuss some of the topical national issues. I'm not very familiar with the details of the story you're citing. I'm also seeing it in the pages of papers today. But the truth is, where we are with the victims of Boko Haram and the crisis itself, it's not a place that the federal government can make a categorical statement on compensation or no compensation. There are so many issues that are involved, and I believe that at this stage, it's not even, we don't have even the full details, of all the victims across the country, particularly in the northern part of the country. And so I don't know where the story was quoted from. I haven't read the story, so I'm not able to speak categorical on it this morning.
Okay, well, that said, perhaps let's start off with something related to the Boko Haram issue as well, the call for amnesty by some leaders, especially from that particular region of the country, for the group Boko Haram. Is the government still thinking of granting amnesty to the group, or the stand remains that, well, no amnesty for any terrorist?
Well, first of all, let me say that there's been a lot of confusion in recent weeks over the call by the Sultan of Sokoto for amnesty for Boko Haram members. And a lot of politicians have jumped on board to confuse the discussion. And it's been so politicized that if you listen to what people are saying from outside, you hardly ever know the position of the federal government, which has been stated by me severally as Minister of Information of this country. First of all, let me say that it was the federal government that first offered dialogue. We made that very clear during the discussions the federal government had after the committee that was set up to look at the Boko Haram situation in the northeast. The federal government did come up with the position that it was ready to negotiate with the insurgents. And that in spite of the attacks, in spite of the ideologies, in spite of the ugly attacks on ordinary citizens, the federal government was still prepared to discuss with members of this group. We offered that severally, but nobody really came up to take the call by the federal government for dialogue. And you will recollect that severally, some members of the group will issue statements and say they were ready for discussion with the federal government. Another group will come out and say that it's fake and they were not the ones issuing the call for dialogue. And as recently as about 4 weeks ago, the Borno State government announced that they struck a deal with Boko Haram for a truce for negotiation to start. And Nigerians will recall that shortly after, some sections of the group also come out to say that so-called that the agreement with Borno State government was false. And so to restate this, the position of the federal government, the president has said it personally, and I've repeated it to the nation severally, that the federal government has never ruled out the options of dialogue. We know that in every war, in every conflict, in the end, combatants do come to the negotiation table. But you cannot offer amnesty as the first option when nobody has come out to discuss with you. If you read the statement by the president in Borno State, the president didn't really say there will be no amnesty. But he said he was looking forward to see who will step out to talk to the government, who will take responsibility, who will come out and say, look, we are the members, or I'm speaking on behalf of this group. And then amnesty is usually an outcome of a discussion, a negotiation. How does the leader of a nation whose citizens are being attacked offer amnesty unconditionally, without negotiation, without anybody coming forward to say, look, we accept amnesty as a principle? So when the Sultan of Sokoto, whom we respect because he has been a partner with the federal government in campaigning to stop Boko Haram attacks in the north, far more than any leader in the north, the Sultan of Sokoto has been very frank in calling for ceasefire, in calling on the group to lay down their arms. And when he made the call, the president didn't say there will be no amnesty. What the president said was he was looking forward to an opportunity where maybe members of the group will step out and say, look, we are members of this group, we are the leaders, we are prepared to talk to government. Amnesty can be offered unconditionally when even members of the group have not accepted amnesty. None of them has come out to say anything. So how does a leader of a nation whose citizens are being attacked and killed in a heinous way, like we're witnessing in Nigeria, just comes out and said there will be amnesty. We should not forget that this terror is not only in Nigeria. In Pakistan, they have been suffering with this for the past 10 years. We have not seen the government of Pakistan come out and say, well, amnesty, or Yemen, amnesty, or Algeria. Yes, amnesty could be part of the solution, but that can only come out in the process of dialogue and negotiations. But how to offer it unconditionally would be very, it's not known. And I think that somewhat politics have been played over this call by the Sultan of Sokoto. That week I was asked, when will the government accept amnesty? I said, well, I'm not the president of Nigeria, but I hope the group will listen to the Sultan who is pleading on their behalf. So I think, honestly, Nigerians should not over-politicize this issue. People continue to compare it to the Niger Delta. We must not forget that amnesty in the Niger Delta came after a series of discussions and negotiations led by leaders of the Niger Delta region and the combatants in the creeks. It was after negotiation reached a certain point and there were commitments that the issue of amnesty came up. It was not gratis. It was not just offered without condition and negotiation. So I think politicians should allow this matter to be taken as a security and national issues, and those looking for votes in 2015 should not unduly over-politicize this issue of amnesty. The president never said we are the ones talking about negotiations. And several groups even came out and said we are speaking on behalf of the group. At a point, the Boko Haram announced General Buhari as their spokesperson in the negotiations. And the president said he was prepared to discuss with anybody that was prepared to stand on behalf of the group and talk to the federal government. Later on, we were told that it was not so. So this is not, we must not confuse it. The federal government is prepared to talk to any credible leaders, standing on behalf of the group. And if amnesty becomes one of the conditions because the group appreciates the conversation and we reach a certain point, maybe it could become an option. But I have never seen the leader of a nation whose nation is under attack announcing amnesty for the attackers without conditions. I've never had it anywhere in history.
Just to recap all that you've said, you're saying that amnesty is on the cards, or could be on the cards. It's not been jettisoned as an option.
We have never jettisoned anything. The truth is that, how do you offer amnesty? Look at what happened in Kano. How travelers were mercilessly murdered in cold blood. Now, if the president of a nation, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Nigeria, were to announce an amnesty to a group that has not come out to negotiate with it, and all the conversations we are holding now, nobody knows the thinking of members of the group, even on the call for amnesty. How does the president and commander-in-chief announce amnesty without pro-conversation, without pro-negotiation, without agreeing on anything? What it will mean is that the president has given up. And that is what it will be. It is a complete abdication.
Let me jump in here. Just a moment. Could you tell us, is the federal...
never at anything. But amnesty or no amnesty can only come up in the process of a conversation, a negotiation. It can't be announced without conditions. I've never had it anywhere in the world.
Could you tell us, is the federal government at any level, formally or informally, discussing with any group, any representation from Boko Haram?
The unfortunate thing about this whole show of Boko Haram is that even our own community leaders in the north have found it very difficult to come out credibly and say we are speaking on behalf of this group. For example, for all this period of maybe the last 1 year that the government has offered its readiness to negotiate, we have not seen any group of people come up, either within the north or within the group, saying, look, we can stand on behalf of this group, and if we talk to the government, we believe that anything we agree with the government, they will stand by it. There is nobody taking responsibility. So what we hear are politicians making outlandish statements for purely political and partisan reasons that have nothing to do with the true security issues on the ground. And the president of a country we can't play politics when people are being killed. And we must clearly understand that if we have not handled this issue with maturity in our conversations, in our statements, and with all the effort that the president and the federal government have made, maybe this country will not be where it is now. Because the intention of this group really is to strike at the core that holds this country together. And we have done everything, for example, to contain this group in the north, and indeed also to let Nigerians understand that this group does not stand for Muslims. It does not stand for Islam. And we have continued to hold on to that argument, and Nigerians have understood. So right, we must not, what is going on now are political statements, and they are not coming from Boko Haram. And I think that the Sultan of Sokoto statement was done with good intention. It was done in good faith, and we believe that the Sultan will still be very, very critical to any conversation. But that can't be the first option by people that have not negotiated with you.
So at the moment, the federal government is not in any form of discussion, formally or informally or by proxy, with any representation or representative of Boko Haram.
The reality is that because this group is very fluid, very, very fluid, you can't say at which point who is a clear leader. People, like I told you, look at the situation in Borno State. The governor came out and the leaders, they said, look, they discussed and had a ceasefire. Shortly after, it was denied by other members of the group, and the killings have continued. So the reality is that we're dealing with a group that is very fluid, that is buried in the population, and that is using guerrilla attacks on innocent citizens. And we believe that maybe there is hardly any clear one single person that can speak on behalf of this group at the moment. So even if there are conversations and attempts at different levels, they are not something that the federal government can hold onto and say that there is a conversation with critical leaders of this group.
Okay, so there is some form of discussion going on, perhaps behind the scene, but as you say, you can't say...
I believe maybe there may be individuals, because at a point you remember that there are groups that said they had the authority of Boko Haram to speak on their behalf. So maybe individuals, like you heard from the government of Borno, may be talking to some members of the group, but it is too early because we have not seen any credible conversation or credible leadership from the group that can come out and say, look, we are speaking on behalf of this group, and at least preponderant members agree with us. So long as we have not come to that stage, we cannot right now say that there is any credible conversation at the moment. And that is what we are looking for. If there are leaders in the north or anywhere that have the authority of the group, the agreement of the group to speak on their behalf, the federal government has made it very clear. The president has said so, I have said so on behalf of the federal government, that we will continue to look forward to that day when either those leaders in the north that have contact say, look, we are ready to talk. Then we can talk. But the conditions for that conversation cannot be proclaimed without any agreement.
Okay, allow me to come in here. Still on security matters, perhaps you talked about political statements. Tell us if this is also a political statement from the former governor of Abia State that accused the government and security agents of throwing bombs all over the country, and at the end of the day say it's Boko Haram.
This is the point I am making, that politicians are speaking without responsibility. What we are hearing is so strange. How do you, for example, imagine that somebody who has been the chief security officer of a state will come out and make outlandish statements against the security forces of his country? Now, let me make this clear to Nigerians. Some of the things we have heard and read on the pages of newspapers coming from leaders, some of them elected leaders still sitting at different levels of government, others former leaders, are so strange that if not that the armed forces of this nation are very patriotic and have sworn to lay down their lives for this nation, they will be discouraged. Now, there is no week that goes without armed forces, security forces, police being attacked in some northern parts of the country. There is no week we don't lose soldiers or lose policemen in the face of this war on terror. And it is strange to say, for example, that the police are bombing police stations to kill themselves, or the soldiers are attacking themselves to die. What will be the purpose?
Well, he said that to increase the security.
I must make it clear that, no, let me conclude. I think the statement credited to the former governor of Abia cannot be taken in isolation. Several people have been making such careless statements, and I want to call on them, please. We must appreciate the great job that the armed forces have done in stabilizing and containing the attacks in this country. And we must know that Many people are losing their children. The soldiers belong to families. They have mothers, they have parents, they have brothers and sisters. The policemen, they are dying, every month. The least we can say is to appreciate the role of the armed forces and the critical job they are doing for this nation. And no matter what we say, the armed forces of Nigeria are still the frontline armed forces in this nation, in this continent. They have done a great job. They are doing a very great job in the most difficult circumstances, and I think we should appreciate them. There is every attack in this nation has been claimed by Boko Haram or some segments of it. For somebody to come out and make those outlandish statements against the armed forces of Nigeria is so unfortunate, it's so unpatriotic, and it was grossly irresponsible.
Well, another issue we're really still on the same issue on security is, you talked about statements, perhaps, as the government, what do you do as a government? Do you call such people? If you say, well, he's been in government before, some would say, maybe he's speaking from experience, perhaps maybe they've done that thing in the past just to increase security votes. Has he been invited?
Let me just say this. There are people in this nation that we expect that based on their own honor and sense of responsibility, they will guard their tongues. They will be a bit more responsible when they comment on sensitive issues affecting the nation. And if government was to go and start questioning those people, maybe some of them say because they anticipate that they will be invited to, again, the whole newspapers will come forward, the television stations, and then what we are trying to avoid is a situation in which government will be looked upon as if we are so insensitive or intolerant of the opposition. And so government has generally maintained some stable maturity as some of these terrible statements are made. But we expect them as leaders of this nation to understand that the security of this nation is not about any particular government. It's not partisan. And I think no matter which party you belong, no matter the political opinion you hold, or what your opinion is about those who are in government now, you must separate us from the future, the progress, the security of this nation. And so we still call on them, former people that have ruled this nation at very critical level at the state and other levels. We expect these leaders to show responsibility, to show sensitivity, to show patriotism. You never see any other nation whose armed forces are deployed to secure the nation being attacked by politicians. It's not done. Go to the US or go to other countries, you never hear this. I think it all has to do with our own level of patriotism and commitment to the nation. We think we can just say anything, but once you have become a leader, there are things you should not say because you know they have weight and they can cause problems. And I think that I call on all our leaders to show responsibility at this critical time in the history of our country.
Do you think that this fight against terrorism by the government and security agencies is overwhelming?
Is what?
Do you think it's overwhelming?
I wouldn't say it's overwhelming, because if you look at what the armed forces have done in the last 1.5 years, you will see that generally their strategy of containing this attack and localizing it have generally succeeded. And the armed forces have also made tremendous progress in busting attacks, in preventing attacks, if not because of the operations of the armed forces in the northeast and some parts of the northwest. What we would have seen in this country would have been far more widespread. But if you look at the situation generally, the armed forces, the security forces have done a great job, and they're doing a great job. They have largely contained the group, and they have also bust attacks. They have also worked on their lines of supplies, and I think that they are doing a great job. What we require, I think, is greater participation by the citizenry, because it is not the kind of thing that the armed forces alone can fish out those living among us. And that is why we continue to call on community leaders, because, you see, when we dealt with the situation in the Niger Delta, it was because some of the leaders in the Niger Delta came out. They knew that the Niger Delta was becoming a bonfire and that development of the region would completely be crippled. And so they stepped out and took responsibility and discussed with the militants, and including governors and other people who are leaders in the region. So I think what we require, particularly in the northern part of the country, is greater involvement. I know our leaders have been doing a great. I've just started the Sultan of Sokoto, holding meetings all the time, talking and making appeals. But I expect greater commitment by all our leaders and all professionals and all people in the north to reach out to people, to speak with our communities. And we must cooperate with security forces. There is no solution to it. if we don't cooperate with security forces, then the violence will fester. And like I said, we are not ruling out. We have already offered negotiation on the table. The security forces must continue to prevent attacks to save lives. This is what they are doing. We does not rule out any other option. But I think we need greater leadership unity behind the federal effort to deal with this matter.
Let me take you to the 27th of March 2012. Part of the reason why that question arises because on that day, the president was in South Korea, Seoul. He was speaking with Yonhap News Agency while he was attending this two-day summit on peaceful use of nuclear energy. He had about 51 world leaders present at the time. And he said, and I quote, "In terms of security challenges, we have some parts of the country where we have terrorist attacks, but it does not affect the whole country. We are in reasonable control. We have the belief that in the middle of this year, in terms of security of individuals, we will have full control." This was, it was supposed to be middle of 2012. And so reports eventually did say, well, this they interpreted as him saying, by the middle of that year, this challenge will be over. But now, we're still grappling with this. So that's why we ask, isn't this overwhelming?
Not really. You know, let me tell you, you know, leaders speak based on their own assessment and based on security reports. Let me say that a lot much more progress has been made in containing terror in the north than the situation was. If you look at the in terms of arrest, in terms of busting attacks, in terms of the real operations that are going on, the security forces have scored significant successes. But because of the nature of the attacks, you see, what has happened is that as we contend them in the critical areas, there are elements that move out to purely sometimes unsuspecting areas to launch attacks. So yes, if the president said that, he said that because he must have had before him significant information about the record of successes being made by the security forces. If there are setbacks, yes, in every situation you can have a target and you have a setback. But the truth is that there's been a lot of effort and the president was speaking based on authority, and unfortunately we haven't quite reached that point. In every war you have that kind of situation. In several respects, in every of the movement, we have had sometimes in Afghanistan, Americans setting targets. Sometimes those targets are met, sometimes they are not met. So the truth is the fact that if they are not met, it means that the operation is continuing and we are learning from why it hasn't been so. That doesn't mean that it's overwhelming or government has lost control. No. What it therefore seeks is greater partnership by the people of Nigeria, by the leaders of Nigeria and our communities to contain the group.
Well, some people say, just yesterday we were speaking with Tunde Bakare, former vice presidential candidate to the CPC, and he was saying that he believes that Boko Haram is heightened, or the problem of Boko Haram is heightened because of corruption. Do you agree with him?
Maybe we cannot rule out issues of governance in the various states where Boko Haram has become a major issue. We can't rule them out. There may be some serious lapses of leadership in the various areas where this group has emerged. But if it is corruption, I'm not sure that corruption can be only in the northern part of the country. If Boko Haram can be blown purely on corruption, then unless we are saying that it's only people in the north that are corrupt and people in the south are not corrupt, therefore there is no Boko Haram operations in the south. So when we make this, you know, you said Tunde Bakare is a former presidential candidate of a party. So we cannot rule out the fact that there are issues of governance, issues of failures of leadership at the local level, at the community level, you know, maybe associated with this. And I believe that the challenge is for greater service delivery at different levels of government. But we cannot just blame attacks of terrorism on corruption. I don't know whether it is corruption in the US that led to 9/11. I don't know whether it's corruption in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Algeria, in the Maghreb, in Yemen, that is causing terrorism. So I think that there are issues, ideological issues involved, there are sectarian issues involved, and I don't think that it would be right for anybody to just sit down because you are looking forward for the next election, maybe as another vice presidential candidate, to just make outlandish statement. We cannot blame everything in the country on corruption. There are issues even related to values, for example, that have crashed, not just matter of corruption. There are some values that have crashed in several of our communities. So let us not just look at every problem in this nation as corruption. I think terrorism is a global phenomenon, and it's not just about corruption. Corruption may have something to do with it in terms of service delivery, in terms of leadership responsibility at the various levels where these groups are operating, and we're working hard to see that those issues are addressed. But I am not sure that you can just stand up and say terrorism is because of corruption.
Okay, I think you just touched on two very key points there, service delivery and leadership responsibility. Perhaps bring us up also to speed on, we went around the country, isn't it? And there were loads and loads of criticisms that followed that particular tour. Why did you decide to go around Nigeria?
Well, let me say this. We decided to have a good governance tour. You remember last year in May, we had a ministerial platform where all ministers came out to state their own agenda, their progress card, their scorecard, and they said, this is what we want to do. We're working on these projects, we're working on these programs. And also for the past 3 years, the Federal Executive Council has issued out a lot of contracts and jobs across the country, power sector, aviation, road sector, railways, and so on. And I made it clear during the ministerial platform that in addition to just speaking to you and issuing press statements, we will lack stakeholders in the society, civil society, media, to move out and inspect these projects and see the progress being done. And that was mainly an opportunity, really, to move beyond press statements to enable Nigerians see on the spot what progress was being made in the key sectors based on what we were doing. And so when we designed the National Good Governance Tour, it was an opportunity also to start a national conversation. When we go on this inspection, we say we will also talk to the people of Nigeria. What are their opinions? What do they think about the progress that government is making? And when we finished the design, we now sold it to all the governors through the National Economic Council, and they all accepted that there was a need for the 3 tiers of government, regardless of our partisan platforms, to work together to show the progress of our democracy and the challenges that we face at different levels. So we went from there to the national, the governors accepted, and we moved to the Nigerian Governors Forum, where we discussed the details of the program and agreed to work together. So what I was doing was not a federal government program. It was a national program for all the 3 tiers of government, for all the political parties in government. We all accepted. And so the criticisms that are coming are purely partisan, and they have to do maybe as the program is moving on, you won't rule out the fact that some are beginning to get afraid. Because when you take journalists to projects, to particular states where everything is laid bare, it's not everybody that may have the confidence. But I believe the National Good Governance Tour has been so educating. And one thing it has brought out is that our media are not reporting democracy, they are not reporting progress, they are not reporting development programs. We are just discussing politicians. And that is why the politicians take all the headlines. No other thing takes the headlines in this nation today. And it is wrong. And I think when we went to some of the states, I don't want to mention names here, some of the states that have never been mentioned on the pages of our newspapers, we discovered they were doing much better than those that are on the papers every day. And that is not correct. So what I've done as a Minister of Information is to make available to the media, to stakeholders in the polity, the progress being made in the country. And I can't think of any better way of involving the people in the development programs of government than we have done through the National Good Governance Tour. Yes, there are criticisms. Some have said maybe we should reduce the number of people going with us. Yes, we are looking into that. Some of the criticisms are also operational, and we're looking at those issues. But generally speaking, I think the tour has been a tremendous success.
Well, you know, governors, Lagos, Edo, they all spoke up one time or the other about this good governance tour, and they find fault with it. But you say that it was agreed at the level of the Governors Forum, of which they are members. So how come? Because some of them think, look, how is it even funded? Why should they be the ones to foot the bill? And it was ill-conceived. You don't need a good governance tour for people to know if you're really working. They have to feel it. And so much going on.
That was really the strange thing that we had. Let me tell you that the Deputy Governor of Lagos was on the committee that approved the final template of the program. And all of them agreed. So if we say we're doing a joint program, how come you don't want to take a responsibility? Is it fair to say that we have agreed to do something together and you say you can't take responsibility? At any rate, we have never asked any state government to give us a kobo. We have never written, I had some outlandish statement that I was asking people to give the National Good Governance to 150 million. We have never asked any state government to give us a kobo for the conduct of the National Good Governance Law. Listen to me. But what the governors and all agreed was that they will provide some logistics, maybe falling of vehicles and other things when we are moving through their states. And if they want maybe to provide a meal or so for the team, I cannot stop them. But there has not been any tax on any state government to give us money to run it. So the reality of it is that we agreed to work on this together. And I think what was happening was purely partisan. What I heard the governor of Lagos say was that we want to make government look like if we are abusing. So it was not because of any money to run the tour, but it's that they are taking a partisan stand against the tour. So you can see that we agreed to do something and we do not have honor to follow through. And we are gentlemen. So I think, honestly speaking, those are maybe purely partisan attacks on the tour, but it is moving on to every state.
Even though you said, well, you wouldn't want to mention some states, I think maybe a state or two perhaps should be mentioned by you. If you say you were going around and you inspected projects and some states don't have that kind of coverage, perhaps you should be able to tell us one or two states that haven't had coverage, and they were. We understand.
We agree
but the other states will understand that you are trying to project some states that have not been in the news quite lately and that have been doing fantastically well.
Well, if you ask me, every state is making tremendous progress, but there are states we have never heard about them, and we went out there and we saw gigantic projects. I give you an example. When we went to Ebonyi State, for example, and we saw the water projects, we saw the state secretariat being built, we saw the training institute, we saw the roads and the bridges, across River Ebonyi, in all parts of the state. Journalists were asking, what happened? How come these people are completely forgotten? No mention on the pages of newspapers, no mention on any television program. Everything is concentrated around Lagos and its environs. And there are people who specialize on performing on the pages of newspapers. But when we go around, we see that it is not so. We also went to Plateau, in spite of all the violence there. We saw tremendous programs by Governor Jang. We didn't know how he was doing it in the midst of all the stories about violence, an Olympic-sized stadium, roads, agricultural projects, water projects. We were shocked. If you ask members of the team, their opinions have changed. In this nation, if you can't sometimes find your way through the media, you are forgotten. And there are high-performing. We went also to Anambra State. We saw what Peter Obi was doing in that state. And we have been to places, of course, high-revenue states are there. But when you go to Akwa Ibom, you will see that there is tremendous infrastructure outlay. You can say that, of rivers. You can say that of several of the Niger Delta states. A lot of work being done across. But the reality is that these things don't come to the front page. They don't get reported. They are not topical issues. So,
Just a moment here. Did you take that up with the journalists? Because if they claim to feign ignorance, and at the end of the day they were telling you, oh, we didn't know that Ebonyi State or this other state is looking so good. Don't they have correspondence or bureau in those areas? Why were they telling you all that story?
I think the problem is that we in the media have decided maybe we want to... And if you look at it's politics that makes news only. You will see, for example, that
we can't say...
you look at the faces that take the front page in Nigeria, that the same old faces of the last 40 to 50 years, whatever they say is front page. Nobody is discussing development. And that is why we decided to go around and see things for ourselves. And we're happy. Look at the power projects, for example. Until I went around and I was showing people that the federal government was building 10 new power plants. Many Nigerians didn't believe. So we went around, and when we saw those power projects, in all the places we went to a Hofba and the outskirts of Benin City, 5 kilometers. The federal government is building a very huge power plant there. The journalists in Benin City didn't know until we took them there. And they said, they didn't know the work has reached at this level and will generate power by the end of this year. We went to Sapele, we were already generating power. We went to Geometric in Aba, and people were shocked. So you see, a lot of work is going on in this country. Before I rode on the train from Ilorin to Ofa, people didn't know that the train was working. And but we rode again from Zungiru to Ateri in Kaduna. Today the trains are moving, but you don't see the stories on the pages of newspapers. Well, we are beginning now this year to end the reconstruction from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. We expect the train to move from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri before the end of the year. It is not a newspaper front page story because we are just reporting attacks. We are not reporting development.
But does it then mean that it is just one good governance tour out of, for some governors who have been in office for 8 years? Is that what the people need to know that will justify their being in governance for 8 years? Just once?
No. The good governance tour is a continuum. It's not going to end at a particular point. We hope to do so routinely. So long as we are there, we will continue to do it. We have just done 16 states, don't forget, we still have about 20 states to go. So we are still going to do it to be routine. Both the ministerial platform and the good governance tour is now routine. We will continue to visit high-performing projects and also projects that are not performing so that we can look at the challenges and get government to work better. And already there is a lot of competition between the states as we move around. Everybody wants to do something. Even in the Federal Executive Council, we are all working hard to show something when we go to the field. So it is indeed an opportunity to get people to work, and we are really seeing a lot of progress in the country. And I want to tell Nigerians that our democracy is working, but sometimes we are too negative.
Well, anyway, some would say we're too critical. Perhaps that's the best way to put it. But again, since you've gone around, people, they wouldn't be happy if we don't ask you about, well, our rail system, transportation. You went around, and I don't think you went by rail to some of these places. Tell us, what are you doing? What's the government doing in terms of rail system?
Well, in terms of rail system, you remember that 20 years before President Goodluck Jonathan came to power, the rail had broken down completely. There was no movement between any part of this country. Now, the president is, since the days of late President Yar'Adua, there was a decision to restore the railway as the only condition for mass transit in the nation. So a lot of work has been done. And I can tell you this. One, government priority is to restore the existing rail lines. We have succeeded already in restoring the rail line from Lagos to Kano. Rail is moving smoothly every week, and even private companies are offering to buy coaches to carry their goods from Lagos to the north. This is very, very important. The second one is the major line between the south-south, southeast, north-central, and northeast, which is the Port Harcourt, Enugu, Makurdi, Lafia, Jos, Maiduguri line. Work is going on, and last week I checked again the Ministry of Transport. It will be completed by the grace of God by December, and the trains will move again. Now, but there are other standard gauge train lines that we're building. The train line, for example, between Warri and Ajakuta has been completed. It's the first standard gauge rail line in West Africa. When we went to the tour in Delta, we rode on the tracks. It was built by Julius Baja, very standard. Now, we're building Abuja and Kaduna. We are almost 50% complete. Work is going on. Nobody is reporting it on the pages of newspapers. The standard gauge between Abuja and Kaduna is 50% complete. Now, we are building the one. They are mobilizing to site now between Lagos and Ibadan. That one will be double track. It's being built by the Chinese. So the standard lines are going on. We have given contract for feasibility studies to build standard gauge lines between the south-south line will move from Lagos to Benin up to Warri, moving up to Calabar. We are designing another line that will take off from Osogbo and move through Abuja, through Ajakuta, and it will be moving right down to Abuja. So we are planning the standard gauge lines, and these are going to be done by private sector partnership with government. So a lot of work is being done. And in terms of the sea transportation, we are delivering the Onyx port phase 4 in Port Harcourt. Will be delivered by August. We went there. A lot of work has been done. About 9,000 hectares of land have been recovered, and people could not believe what we saw. So a lot of jobs have been done, but like I said, we are in a very partisan society, and what people want to see is that the president is not working. It is not true.
Mr. Mako,
this government is working
come in here,
and will be appreciated.
We've seen this railway lines. I mean, we can even see the visuals here, and I'm sure that a host of viewers too have already seen it. But, you know, the question will be, you've said that the Lagos to Kano is already working, is in progress, for instance, and it is taking off. The question is, how long does it take, for instance, to travel from Lagos to Kano? What kind of coaches do we have on these lines? Are we hoping to invite the private sector into it, or is this just going to be a government-run thing? And how efficient is it? Because you know very well that our roads are terribly overstressed, and if we can get most of the goods that come in via trailers to be on the railway lines, our roads will definitely be better for it.
Well, absolutely. Some of the details you can get from the MD of Nigerian Railway Corporation, and that is the point I'm challenging. We started this thing in December. We've not seen channels go to follow it up, maybe invite the MD of Nigerian Railway Corporation to discuss the details of the operations. We even go to a door park and see the movement by rail within Lagos and say, well, this is what we see. We're discussing with passengers. I have rode on the train myself with passengers.
Correct, Mr. Mako. Mr. Mako, sorry to cut you. I think that is not correct. When the railway line started work from Ido, Channels Television was there. So if you did not see it did not mean that Channels Television did not go there.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I concede that to you. I concede that to you. Now, the present movement is still based on the old rail system. It is slow, but it is steady. And we have just placed order to get new coaches. What we have been using are the old coaches that have been rehabilitated by the engineers of the Nigerian Railway Corporation. But we have placed orders for new coaches. Private people are also placing orders for new coaches for those rails to make them more comfortable. But at the moment, we are moving cement, we are moving goods from Lagos to the north by rail, and we are also moving people. We will increase the frequency as more coaches come, but the line is now fully operational, fully rehabilitated, and the Lagos and the Maiduguri Port Harcourt line will be fully rehabilitated by December. And that will be a lot of progress.
Let's quickly go, because we run out of time. Let's quickly go to the state of the roads. I mean, we saw what happened with the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. We saw that the contract was cancelled, taken away from by Courtney, and we were told that Julius Berger was going to move in immediately. What exactly is happening to that particular, is it order or contract?
Well, I think we are moving in onto Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. We have talked about that. And there is a lot of intervention now coming from Shopee. What the president has decided was to devote more of the Shopee funds to roads. So several of the key artery roads that have been in bad condition are now receiving additional funding. That's why you are seeing Benin Ore virtually concluded now. If you ride from Benin to Ore now, you will see from the other end that you have one of the greatest, best roads built in the country presently.
Are you saying the East-West road is still moving to site on the Lagos-Ibadan Express Road?
Yeah, well, I can tell you that there's been a lot of intervention, and the federal government took it away because it was supposed to be PPP, but Courtney did not perform, and that was why we took it over. It was a high revenue generating road that we thought we can start with the PPP, but it's a new initiative. So there are several issues involved, and that's why the federal government, instead of allowing people to continue to suffer on that road, decided to take over. And I believe, I'll check it out, I believe either they have moved in or they should be moving in on that road, because federal government is committed to ensuring that that road, which is a major artery road, is rehabilitated.
Mr. Mako, it doesn't mean that, well, when we say this, we're saying it because, well, that is the truth. Well, coming for this particular interview, you came pretty early and you made it so easy to come on this program. But why is it so difficult for others in the cabinet to appear on programs? When you talk about people not talking about what is happening, there are so many ministers who wouldn't want to come on programs and will have evidence or evidences to show that they've been invited and they never turned up.
Well, I can say that, let me thank you, Suleiman. Let me thank you, Suleiman, because actually, all ministers are spokespersons of their ministries and can explain a lot of the things they are doing to the media. I wouldn't know the circumstances under which some of my colleagues may have turned down the invitation to speak to you. I don't have the records. Maybe they are caught up with other activities and they are not able to come at that time. But I think that for every minister is an opportunity to explain And we're doing well. So it's no reason for any minister to be afraid. In transportation, we're doing well. In aviation, we're doing well. Look at all the airports that have been renewed completely in the last 1 year. In agriculture, we're doing well. In power, look, 10 new power projects about to be completed in this country is a record that no government in the past has ever done. So I think, generally speaking, we have a lot of things we should be proud of and speak to the nation. So I will take up the challenge if you give me the names of my colleagues. Maybe use me as the contact and Minister of Information. Any minister you want to speak to and you can't reach, please approach me. I'll be able to take them to you to speak to you.
Well, we'll do that.
Well, one thing that at least happened on that Good Governance store, you know, you spoke about Akwa Ibom State, but it went viral when it was published, how the governor of Akwa Ibom State was talking about the 2007 PDP senatorial primary election, and it was while you were there, and he said, I used my own hand to strike out the name of the person who has won before, and I said it's important for me to give that region a senator in 2007, and I produced Senator Aloysius Etuk for you. And this was all over the place, and thanks to Good Governance Store, Nigerians would not have heard this. What happened? How did this? What do you think about this?
Let me say this. You know, the governor of Akwa Ibom State is one of the best governors in this nation in terms of performance, in terms of delivery. And when we went to Akwa Ibom, we saw the flyovers. It was like you are driving through some sections of London. If you go to Uyo today, you must give that governor the kudos for what he has done to transform a very rural state like Akwa Ibom into one of the standard bearers today in terms of infrastructure. Look at his underground drainage system in Akwa Ibom. It's the first of its type we have seen in this country. We went through it and we saw what he was doing. But the governor of Akwa Ibom is a very bold man. And he has come under attack sometimes largely because of politics. He's bold. He goes out for what he believes in. When he spoke that day, we were there. But later on, he explained. And unfortunately, the press took one section of what he said and made politics with it and forgot the explanation. He was saying that this was done, before the primaries. And so when he was giving the additional explanation, because he also says so, that people are still going to go out to misquote him. So he made the explanation, and we have placed it, what he said on our ministry's website. And I think it's important for people. I'm not speaking on behalf of Akwa Ibom. The Commissioner of Information in Akwa Ibom has also tried to explain. And I think that the governor has not been properly reported because people were not privy to the facts and his explanation. And as a journalist, I believe if somebody makes a statement, listen, if somebody makes a, can you hear me, please?
That part.
As journalists, if somebody makes a statement and then explain the statement, the important thing is to explain, I say this, but this was the circumstance. And I think he tried to explain it. And I think we should place what he said for Nigerians to make their own judgment. We have done that.
Mr. Labaran Maku, Minister of Information, thank you very much indeed for speaking with us today on Sunrise Daily.
Thank you, my brothers and colleagues. Thank you very much indeed.
All right, then we're back in just a moment here. Join us again.